Hello everyone, my name is Jeff Hoagland and welcome to a modern deck tech video here. Today we're going to be talking about an archetype that's kind of existed in Modern for a little while now. It's called Blue-Black Fairies. In fact, this archetype has existed since the card Bitter Blossom was removed from the modern ban list. Bitter Blossom is a tribal fairy enchantment for 1 and a black that at the beginning of every upkeep you lose 1 life and get a 1/1 black fairy rogue token. So this card was kind of on the modern ban list from the start because it was kind of a scary, oppressive card from Standard's past, and since it's been introduced into Modern, it really hasn't made that big of an impact because it's kind of a slow, grindy card in a format that's kind of fast-paced. So today we're looking at a build of fairies that kind of deviates a little bit from the traditional kind of flash counter style fairies deck that we're used to in the modern format that hasn't had a ton of success. This deck list finished second place at a modern classic at an SCG Open recently, and it's kind of a more aggressive slant on the fairies archetype. As opposed to playing a bunch of counter magic and flash threats like Cryptic Command and Mistbind clicks, we're kind of lower to the ground and have discard as our primary disruptive elements. Our main form of interaction here is modern staple Inquisition of Kozilek, just good, clean, generally takes the most powerful card. We also have a couple copies of Spell Snare. It's a good tempo generating card. The threat suite is really what I find most interesting in this deck, though. In addition to the Bitter Blossom that we talked about a second ago, we have the pretty stock Spell Stutter Sprite. This is a 1/1 for 2 that when it flashes in, it counters a spell with a mana cost X or less, where X is the number of fairies you control. I think this card's pretty well positioned in the current Modern format just because of the Death Shadow aggro deck is one of the more popular decks right now, along with Affinity. This card counters most cards in those decks fairly easily, and then it, especially against like Affinity, it goes on to trade with one of their creature lands, or it eats a Pestermite or something along those lines. In addition to that, we also have Vendilion Click as a threat, just another modern staple, 3/1 flying flash. When it comes into play, not only can you take a card out of your opponent's hand, but you can also take an extra card that you have in your own hand and shuffle it away to draw another card. In addition to being kind of lower to the ground, this build of fairies aims to leverage a couple other cards that have recently been introduced to the modern format. The first of which is previous standard All-Star that was then banned out of the format, Smuggler's Copter. You know, 3/3 can crew 1. When you attack or block with it, you get to draw and discard a card. So this kind of gives us an outlet for using those fairies that we're generating from things like Bitter Blossom and making spells that kind of have a really relevant impact on the board. Because the curve of this deck is so low, this Smuggler's Copter also gives us a nice outlet for discarding extra lands we draw in the mid to late game. This also, you can use creatures that are summoning 6 to crew vehicles, so if you have a new token from your Bitter Blossom, you can use that to crew your Smuggler's Copter right away and start attacking and applying pressure to your opponent. Because this configuration of fairies is a little bit more discard and aggressive based than one that's trying to hold up things like Mana Leak and Cryptic Commands, it also gets to leverage another powerful modern card in Liliana of the Veil. You know, this is a card that doesn't really play well with trying to play a flash game and holding up a bunch of counter spells, but when you're playing your threats out aggressively, and you are not trying to hold a bunch of cards in your hand, her plus effect can be very, very reasonable, as well as being additional supplemental removal. Another new card that kind of pushed this archetype forward in the most literal sense is Fatal Push, just really efficient piece of removal. Previously you had to splash either white to get Path to Exile or red to kind of have Lightning Bolt if you wanted an efficient removal spell, and now we don't really have that problem anymore. The last card in here, again, just another modern staple, is Snapcaster Mage. Snapcaster just allows us to reuse some of our disruption against the spell-based combo decks, allows us to reuse our removal against the creature-based decks in the format. It's just super flexible card, while also being another thing that can both crew Smuggler's Copter and generate some value with us. Any game where you go discard on 1 and a Smuggler's Copter on 2 into snap discard on 3, crew your Smuggler's Copter and start attacking. A lot of the more fair decks in the format are going to have a pretty hard time keeping up with that. One of the things I like most about this deck is the mana base that it gets to play. A lot of decks in Modern basically passively start with somewhere between 17 to 18 points of life, just between, you know, playing a shock land out and fetching a couple of times. The mana base in this deck doesn't hurt much at all, really. There's only a single shock land in the deck and just 1 copy of Watergrave. There's only 4 fetch lands in Polluted Delta. The mana does get a touch awkward at times because we are trying to cast double blue Vendilion Clicks and double black Liliana the Veil with 4 Mutavaults, but we're also playing a slightly higher land count on average than a lot of modern decks since we have 24 lands, so I don't think it's too much of an issue a lot of the time. I also love that because we're playing a higher than average land count, we have a full 7 creature lands. This deck has a lot of ways to get utility out of the extra resources drawing, whether it's discarding them to a Smuggler's Copter loot or a Liliana Plus, or just attacking with the lands that we've drawn. The sideboard here is a smattering of cards for different matchups. We've got Ceremonious Rejections here that are good against things like Eldrazi Tron and Bant Eldrazi. We've got Energetic Explosive, which is a good flexible card that's good against Affinity as well as Death Shadow aggro. Surgical Extraction is excellent in the Snapcaster Mage decks. You usually need to draw 2 pieces of Graveyard Hate in order to keep up with a deck like Dredge, and Surgical Extraction along with Snapcaster Mage means you have 2 pieces of interaction to play as early as the second turn of the game. Dispels and Thought Seizes as additional ways to interact with spell-based combo decks when your things like Fatal Push and Murderous Cut and Go for the Throats aren't particularly powerful. And then we have a couple of copies of Vampiric Link here. Something that's really important in this deck against some of the more aggressive decks in the format is that we don't have any ways to gain life in the main deck. So Vampiric Link is not only good at like suiting up, say, our Vendilion Click, our Snapcaster Mage to start buffering our life total, but Vampiric Link is actually pretty good against Eidolon of Rhetoric out of the burn deck, because if you put a Vampiric Link on their Eidolon, you'll gain 2 life whenever you cast a spell because the Eidolon is dealing that damage, and you'll gain 2 life whenever your opponent casts a spell. So it basically negates that creature while also gaining you life when they play spells, so pretty powerful. Ashiok Nightmare Weaver is one of those cards that might seem a little bit odd in the board, but this is a very low-cost Planeswalker that can help you grind against other kind of mid-range value strategies, and, play this in the green-black X matchups, basically. You can play this out, plus it, grab their Tarmogoyf, put it into play. It's a card that requires they redirect some of their attention to it, and it can also kind of win the game on its own. If it goes unanswered, it eventually exiles their hand and their graveyard. At any rate, I'm kind of interested to see how this plays out. I know in the past, the more flash-based fairies list, again with Cryptic Command and Mistbind Click, haven't had a ton of success. So when I saw this deck got second at a Classic, it was kind of a new take on the archetype, trying to leverage the power of Bitter Blossom, which is a powerful card, even if it is a little bit slow for a lot of the matches in Modern. So I'm interested to see how this plays out against some of our Gauntlet decks here this evening. Stay tuned for some video matches with those. And remember, if you enjoy the videos, to like them on YouTube and share them on your social media. If you are enjoying the content and you want to help support me, you can do so in a couple different ways. The first is by subscribing on Twitch for varying amounts or becoming a patron on Patreon. There's links on how to do both of those things down below the stream. You can also support my content by supporting my sponsors. My Magic content is sponsored by Inked Gaming. You can get all your customized gaming wear there, everything from mouse pads to playmats. And then there is mtgcardmarket.com. They would love to sell you some Magic singles, as well as sparedeck.com. They would love to rent you some Magic singles. Why own your deck when you can rent it? There's discount codes to all those things on my sponsors page, which is linked down below the stream as well. And thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the games.